freaking years now. 36 years ago, he committed a sex offense. 36 years ago, before there was an internet, how could he argue, in his plea agreement, because that's what it was, he didn't have a jury trial, how could he say, well, so long as you don't ever put my picture and my home address on the website, right? There wasn't an internet. There's no Megan's Law website. He had no clue, and nobody else did. And I'm not saying he had a bad lawyer. He didn't, because that lawyer didn't know there was going to be an internet and a Megan's Law website either. Okay, so this is the kind of crap that's been going on. Just in case you haven't noticed my tone yet, I'm planning to wake you up, and I'm planning to swear a little bit. I have only heard one person say fuck so far, but the fact is that I'm probably going to say it multiple times because I kind of get riled up when I'm up here speaking. Thank you. So, and what we're here to talk about this afternoon, again, is a Supreme Court decision from 2003. And it's like, why in the world would I want to be talking about something that happened 12 years ago? That's a long time ago, right? It might have even, happened before you became a registered sex offender or your loved one became a registered sex offender. Well, the reason is I am looking at this draconian tapestry that has been built, right? And I am looking for the threads to pull and for this freaking thing to collapse. And this is one of those threads. Okay. So my esteemed colleague, Chance Oberstein, is going to be talking in just a minute about the case itself, and then I'm going to talk about how we can overturn the darn thing, because we can. And I have to admit, I was a little disappointed to hear Nancy yesterday say, that's too big, that's too much, we're never going to do it. And I think very highly of her, and she has really kicked some major butt in Maryland, and she's going to continue kicking butts in Maryland, and that's awesome, okay? And she was also very quick to distinguish that decision is based upon the state constitution and not the federal constitution. So we will look for the right case to get us to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Chance Oberstein, who, by the way, is a criminal defense attorney, I'm a civil rights attorney. Okay, but we work very well hand in glove in leading the California Reform Sex Offender Laws Organization. I'm the president and Chance is the vice president. So I get calls constantly about, oh my God, this happened in my trial and that happened in my trial and it needs to be overturned. And I go, please call Chance. If you want somebody to sue a city, a county, or perhaps the state of California, I'm your attorney. If you just want to contest your conviction, or my goodness, and we work together actually getting people off the registry. And the fact is, there's very few people who are eligible to get off the registry in California, and it's a discretionary decision by a judge who faces re-election. So trust me, just because you're eligible doesn't mean it's going to happen. But anyway, I digress. Here's Chance Oberstein, criminal defense attorney and vice president of California RSOL.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see everybody. We're here today, and we're grouped together, and we're thinking, why? Why do we have to go why do we have to do this? And it really starts with, in my opinion, Smith v. Doe. Okay, and that's this U.S. Supreme Court case that was decided in March 5th, 2003. Now, I'll give you a little bit of the stage setting here, and then I think I'll give it to Janice once we get through the mythology of this case. On May 12, 1994, the state of Alaska enacted the Alaska Sex Offender Registration Act. Respondents, John Doe and John Doe II, they were convicted of sexual abuse of a minor before the passage of the act. Both respondents, along with Jane Doe, wife of John Doe I, brought an action. And they were seeking to declare the act void under the ex post facto clause, Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 of the Constitution, and Due Process Clause of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Now, how many of you are familiar with the ex post facto clause? Okay, not many. It's kind of simple. It's Latin for after the fact, which refers to laws adopted after an act is committed, making it illegal, although it was legal when done, or increasing the penalty for a crime after it's committed. And I think that this is category 2, increasing the penalties. Therefore, if a state legislature or Congress enacts new rules of proof or longer sentences, which the registration proves to be, those new rules or sentences do not apply to crimes committed before the new law was adopted. The operative thing here is whether or not it's punishment. In this case, the United States District Court for the District of Alaska granted summary judgment for the state of Alaska because they determined that the state legislature had intended the act to be a non-punitive civil regulatory scheme. The Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit held that although the state legislature had intended the act to be non-punitive civil regulatory scheme, the effects of the act were punitive despite the legislature's intent, or the legislature's intent. So, the Supreme Court granted certiorari and for the first time decided whether the registration requirement was retroactive punishment prohibited by the ex post facto clause. On March 5, 2003, the court held that the act is non-punitive and its retroactive application does not violate ex post facto clause because, and this is where the mythology comes in, and you know, I'm going to read these things to you, but just let it absorb. Think about this for a minute. The regulatory scheme has not been regarded in our history and traditions as punishment. That was their first line of rationale. The sex offender registration and notification statutes are of fairly recent origin, which suggests that the statute was not meant to be punitive. Okay. I don't know about any other states, but California's had it for quite a while. The Act, in particular, its notification provisions, do not resemble shaming punishments of the colonial period. Of course, that's the contrast between now and the colonial period. Because punishments such as whipping, pillory, which I don't even know what that means, and branding, I do know what that means, inflicted physical pain and staged a direct confrontation between the offender and public. Even punishments that lacked corporal punishment, such as public shaming, humiliation, and banishment, involved more than just the dissemination of information. They either held the person up before his fellow citizens for face-to-face shaming or expelled him from the community. The aim being to make offenders suffer permanent stigmas, which in effect cast the person out of the community, which this does not. Supreme Court. I'll get to that. but I'll get to that in a minute. But as you can see, as we start to take off on the rationale, you can start to see the mythology starting to build. The stigma of Alaska's Megan Law, or Alaska's Megan's Law, results not from public display for ridicule and shaming, but from the dissemination of accurate information, underline accurate information, about a criminal record, most of which is already public. The publicity may cause adverse consequences for the convicted defendant, running from mild personal embarrassment or social ostracism. In contrast to colonial shaming punishments, however, the state does not make the publicity and the resulting stigma an integral part of the objective of the scheme. The purpose and principal effect of notification is to inform the public for its own safety, not to humiliate the offender. The process is more analogous to a visit to an official archive of criminal records than it is to a scheme of forcing an offender to appear in public with some visible badge of past criminality. It's just not much. Now, getting back to the purpose, and I think this is the crux of it, the court decided it's not excessive. It's not excessive with respect to this purpose for the following reasons. The risk of recidivism posed by sex offenders is frightening and high. When convicted sex offenders re-enter society, they are much more likely than any other type of offender to be rearrested for a new rape or sexual assault. The duration of the reporting requirements is not excessive. Empirical research on child molesters, for instance, has shown that contrary to conventional wisdom, most reoffenses do not occur within the first several years of release, but may occur as late as 20 years following release. Now, there is no wide and indiscriminate dissemination of this information. As we've explained, however, the notification system is a passive one. An individual must seek access to the information. Now, This is a simplistic view of a very advanced Supreme Court. And to give you just an idea, the majority deciding this opinion was Justice Kennedy, joined by Rehnquist, O'Connor, and Scalia. Thomas and Souter concurred, and Stevens, Ginsburg, and Breyer dissented.
Can you forward to that slide, please? We have a slide about the justices and how they voted. There you go. Thank you.
With that in mind, I'm going to give you over to Janice.
Thank you, Chance. Thank you. There we go. Okay, so now I get to rant and rave. He gets to be calm. I get to rant and rave. And we do that by design. Good cop, bad cop, good attorney, bad attorney. I don't know, crazy attorney, sane attorney, whatever you want to do. Okay, so here we go. Let's go to the next slide, please, because this is why the case has to be overturned. Okay, we can't live with this case a day longer than we absolutely have to. Because just in case you don't know, it's harming your ability to find a job, to find a place to live. How about social stigma, which supposedly, according to the Supreme Court, ain't going to happen or wasn't happening? And how about vigilante violence? We have people in the state of California being gunned down for no other reason than they're on their fucking registry and that their address is put on there. Their home address is listed on this public website, which everybody has access to. Yes, ma'am?
So if it's saying about passive, it's not passive in Arizona. They send out notifications to the neighborhood with your picture and your address and so forth.
There's a lot of untruths in that Supreme Court decision, right?
One thing that we heard that was accurate.
The fact is, nationwide now, we're getting close to 1 million people on the registry. And if that doesn't scare you, then you must be asleep. Because the fact is, that's 1 million families being affected. And just like the Reverend told us this morning about collateral consequences and how every family is involved, you can't ignore it, right? In Frank Lindsay's case, when he led, he was on the register, put on the registry 36 years ago. He was leading a productive life. He was Citizen of the Year in Pismo Beach, California, until Megan's Law, this passive information system, divulged that he was on the sex offender registry in 1979. He lost his business. His landlord refused to renew his lease to him and said, oh, well, I've got somebody else that wants to come in. That property was vacant for 2 years, okay? His daughter in high school was harassed so badly, she had to leave high school and go live with her mom, who lived hours away, so that stigma would not be attached to her. This is the kind of crap that we're putting up with every single day. In this hometown of Santa Maria where I live, a 9-year-old boy was harassed by his classmate who brought flyers about his dad. He didn't know his father was on the registry. He didn't even know what a sex offender registry was. And this kid brought it, this flyer, and was distributing it, to the whole class. And you know what the principal's office said? It's okay. The kids have a right to know. So we live in a town of 100,000 people. I guess it's good that it's at least that big, that the kid could go to another school, elementary school, and use his mother's last name. Okay? This is a kind of punishment that is going on. And when I go to our monthly meetings throughout the state, this is one of the things I tell people. You are being punished 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Why do I say that? It's not to make people feel depressed. It's to say, yes, it is happening. It is happening to you. And I don't care what the U.S. Supreme Court says or any other fucking court says. It's punishment. Call it what it is. Okay, next slide. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so here we go. Has the Supreme Court ever made a mistake before? Oh, yes, they have. And I'm here to tell you about a few of them, okay? This is one of them, the good old McCarthy era, right? Well, we're going to pick on communists. And I'm not a communist myself, but I believe communists can believe what they want to believe. It's supposed to be a free country, right? And I understand that sometimes people went to communist meetings for no other reason that they were dating somebody who was a communist, or maybe they had good refreshments and they're a starving college student. Okay, cool, let's go to the communist meeting today. Okay, so the fact is, though, okay, I think you skipped a slide, but let's just stay here for right now. The fact is that anybody, no, go back to the McCarthy one, please. So anybody at that point in time who was even thought to be a communist, you were put on a blacklist. That's what it was called in Hollywood. I am from California, and the fact is that you weren't going to work in Hollywood. That's it. Okay, you went to a communist meeting, somebody that you love, maybe one of your cousins is a communist, whatever it was really guilt by association. So if you're a family member of a registered citizen today, it is guilt by association. And all of that, the punishment, not maybe all of it, but a lot of the punishment that's being put on a registered citizen is also being put on you. You're having that experience, it is affecting your life. So let's go back a slide and talk about Plessy versus Ferguson, which most people, unless you went to law school, you don't even know that case exists, but it's a case before Brown versus Board of Education. So I think most people do know about that one. So in Plessy versus Ferguson, our U.S. Supreme Court said separate but equal schools was fine, right? Oh, everybody's getting the same education? No problem. Separate but equal education, that's just fine. 1896, so do a little bit of math here. It took a long time, 58 years, before the Supreme Court overturned itself. And I will tell you today, I am not that patient, okay? I am not waiting 58 years because I don't have 58 years to wait. So the fact is, Chance and I are going to the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're going to overturn this fucking decision. And we don't care that we've never been to the Supreme Court before. We know where the place is. We'll go knock on the door. Okay. So let's talk about another example shortly, because it really is important to know that they fucked up before, and they do eventually correct themselves, if in fact somebody bothers to correct them. So this case in Korematsu, this was about Japanese Americans. Oh, you can take their property away. Oh yes, you can put them in internment camps. Nothing unconstitutional about that. WTF, right? They didn't go to government class and learn that in high school like the rest of us, Of course it was wrong. And finally, it did get overturned. But that was 44 years, right? The Civil Liberties Act of 1988. And guess what? They got paid a whopping $20,000 for living in internment camps, for having their property taken away, for having their lives ruined. 44 years, it's better than 58, but I'm still not that patient. Okay, so we already did the McCarthy era. It took less time here to get things fixed. And also, some people don't realize that the McCarthy era, it didn't just focus on communists, it also focused on gays. It's like, you're different, therefore McCarthy was targeting you. So it took time to get that overturned as well, the Communist Control Act. Okay, so again, Supreme Court justices are human, whether or not they want to admit it, they're human, and the fact is they make mistakes. And sometimes they make decisions based on political reasons. Oh my God, they ignore the law. So you heard that crap that Chance was just reading to you, which is from the case itself, right? And they're talking about things that weren't true then, and they certainly aren't true now. So the fact is, we need to bring the truth, we need to bring to the facts to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I'm willing to say, okay, you want to believe everything that was said in the 2003 decision? Go ahead. You can believe it. But it's not the truth today. So let me bring to you the truth, right? Let me bring to you the fact that the reoffense rate, and by the way, I encourage you to use that term instead of recidivism, try reoffense rate, okay? That, because everybody's afraid of that somebody's going to do it again, okay? You crossed the line once, you're going to do it again. This is what I had a judge tell me in open court in Long Beach, California, a Superior Court judge. We had a 30-minute hearing, that's all I got, and this is how he started out. All sex offenders are monsters. They always do it again, and there is no cure. That's how our hearing started. This was a civil case. What isn't even a criminal case? And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a bad day. Okay. And about 20 minutes into it, this judge is telling me, and with all the conviction in his little heart, about that, well, you know, a sex offender is the same as a predator, is the same as a pedophile, is the same as blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, actually, Your Honor, that's not true. And so then he goes, aha. If I went out to the street today and I asked 10 people if that was true, 9 out of 10 people would tell me it's true. Okay? And this was my answer, Your Honor. There was a time if you went out on the street and you asked 10 people if the earth was flat, all 10 people would tell you that it was. And I said, and we know better now. So he kicked my ass. I lost the case, but I felt better about it. And perhaps I educated him that the earth is now round. But maybe not. Okay, so we're getting to the fact where there are some cases, some state cases, next slide please, where are some glimmers of hope. And so what I'm seeing is that the hope is coming through these state, mostly Supreme Court cases. Okay, and the first one was in Indiana of all places. I say that because I've been there and hope not to go back. But the fact is, and they don't want me there anyway, so Wallace versus State of Indiana. Okay, so they did look at ex post facto, right? Because it imposes a burden that would have the effect of adding punishment. Wow, doesn't take a rocket scientist or even a lawyer to figure that one out. But the fact is that in 2009, the Indiana Supreme Court did something positive. And then Ohio, I guess another one, I don't consider a bastion of civil liberties, but the fact is they had a damn good attorney there who isn't in the room. Where are you? Is it Chance? Well, anyway, he's here at the conference, and I got a chance to talk to him. It was his case. And in Ohio, your state legislature cannot impose a new or additional burden, right? It's like, okay. Think about it. The reason that there are crimes and penalties for crimes is to get people not to do things, because if they do them, they're going to be penalized. That means you need to know what the penalty is ahead of time. That's why the ex post facto clause is there. Okay, so what if, somebody decides, okay, you can't wear red lipstick anymore, as far as women, guys, if you want to wear it too, and if you ever wore red lipstick in your whole life, you're going to jail. But I didn't know that wearing red lipstick was a crime, right? But now it is, so we're going to put you all in jail because you wore red lipstick. I mean, that's how stupid and ridiculous this is, and that's what you're having to live with. Okay, and then Ohio, another case. This had to do with juveniles, though. I love this case. I love it, and I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't just talk about punishment. It talks about cruel and unusual punishment. That is a really high bar for us lawyers to meet. If you can convince a judge that this is cruel and unusual punishment, you have had a good day, and you deserve a gold star. Okay? So your client may or may not pay you, but you still deserve a gold star. So the fact is, these state courts are chipping away at a U.S. Supreme Court decision. They don't want to take on the U.S. Supreme Court directly, so they're kind of working around the edges here. Okay, Oklahoma, again, another positive decision. What? You can't retroactively extend somebody's registration period, and that's what Nancy was talking to us about yesterday, too, and I think that's the next slide here, and what happened in Maryland. I mean, how could you? How could you come in and they tell you you've got to be on the registry for 10 years? They changed the law. It's like now you have to be on there for 25, which would be bad enough, but how about the rest of your life? And some people entered into plea agreements based upon an understanding that they would be on this registry and they would be shamed and in this all these things that the Supreme Court said not, for at least only 10 years. And then later on, the legislature wants to change that and go, oh no, we think you should do it for the rest of your life. Okay? Not. All right, so Maryland is doing great things, and I'm so proud of Maryland. I used to live there. And they didn't kick me out. I moved on my own accord. Next slide, please. Just for the record. Go next. Maybe my slides are not right. Okay, next. Are you talking Pennsylvania? Okay. For some reason, I don't have this slide. So Pennsylvania's done good things too. But again, it basically has to do with juveniles. And again, they went back to their state constitution. This is not a federal constitutional decision. Next, please. But it's progress. How about N. Ray Taylor? Okay, so here in California, well, I guess I'm not here in California, but in California, we actually got a state Supreme Court decision that I agree with. My only problem with it is it didn't go nearly far enough. So one of the things that I said earlier about one of the ways in which people are harmed solely by being on the registry and why it's punishment is you can't find a place to live, okay? And even when Emily was here earlier, Ryan, she was talking about the man who probably never even committed a sex offense, but he was in prison forever, 18 years I think it was, and now he's been out for however long he's been out and he can't find a place to live. What kind of society do we have? What kind of nation do we have if we think it's okay to tell people they can't live indoors? I mean, that is punishment. That is inhumane. Telling somebody whether they're in Florida, you have to live under the bridge, or you're downtown LA, you got to live on the sidewalk. What the fuck is going on? You know, it is a freaking miracle we haven't had somebody pull out an automatic weapon and mow down a bunch of people. It's a freaking miracle. And the only reason I can think it doesn't happen is because people on the registry are so depressed, right? And maybe they can't afford bullets. It's like, okay, and I'm a peacemaker. Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela, they are my heroes of all time. I am not advocating violence. I'm just expressing my amazement that somebody hasn't picked up a weapon and started killing people, right?
There's a law abiding and you're not allowed to have guns.
Yeah, right. Well, I had somebody who did some research, and it turns out you can have a bow and arrow. Anyway, I didn't say that. That's just an anecdote. Okay, so what they did say in this case, our state Supreme Court, which is not known for being liberal, even though it's in California, they have said, oh my gosh, it does violate the Constitution to have residency restrictions. Wow. So people are being punished because they're on the registry? And residency restrictions are unconstitutional. This is a U.S. constitutional issue, okay? This one is. We're going to see if the AG is stupid enough to appeal this, but if they do, I'm all for it. Chance and I will be there with our briefcases. Okay, so, but the bad part about this is they said it only applies to people on parole. What? Only to people on parole? I mean, we have over 100,000 people on our state registry alone. Okay, we are the gorilla in this category. And it keeps growing because guess what? We have a lifetime registry for virtually every single person. So the fact is that 6,000 people are on parole. So we have really over 100,000 people who are not on parole. And the question is, will in fact this case be used or not in cities and counties and the state? So we have this very unfortunate law called Jessica's Law. Anybody heard of Jessica's Law? Yeah. It's sick. Okay, so Jessica's Law, you can't live within 2,000 feet of a school or park. That's bad enough. And then what the little buzzards did in Sacramento was they said, and you cities and counties, you want to pass more restrictive measures? Go right ahead. We have one city in California, the city of Bell Gardens, that has a half-mile restriction. Okay? And that's the worst as far as distance, but they're beat in some other cities and counties by where you can't be near. Okay, so you can't live within not just a school or a park, you can't be near the library, you can't be near the museum, blah, 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 blah. You can't live near these places. I mean, you look at the maps, and you virtually cannot live anywhere in the city, but that's not banishment. Really? So Frank Lindsay lives in Grover Beach, California. Okay? He was there before they passed their freaking law. So they said, okay, Frank Lindsay, you can stay in Grover Beach, California, but you cannot move to another residence in Grover Beach, California. Now, why do you think he might want to? How about the fact that in 2010, a complete stranger broke into his home, waited for Frank with two of Frank's hammers, and when Frank walked in the door, says, I'm going to kill you, you sick motherfucker. And then he tried. And this guy was younger, bigger. He probably could have killed Frank, but Frank is nimble. So he did a backward somersault over his railing and ran for his life, literally. But it's not punishment. So Frank cannot move from one home in Grover Beach to another home in Grover Beach. So that's why Grover Beach got sued. Okay? Last year, and I'll talk about this tomorrow and with Chance, about presence restrictions. We have virtually gotten rid of all presence restrictions in the state of California. And we did it very systematically. So what we did is we decided that we were going to sue the ones that had the worst ordinances. And oh, by the way, the cities in Orange County, because Orange County District Attorney, after he convinced his county board of supervisors to pass presence restrictions, then he went and lobbied all the cities in Orange County to pass presence restrictions, and he lied to them. I have the memos. He told these cities that they had the legal authority to pass presence restrictions, and they do not. And he cited Jessica's law. And Jessica's law says residency restrictions. It says nothing about presence restrictions. And so we caught this idiot with his pants down. They reelected him, so they're idiots themselves for reelecting him. But the fact is that presence restrictions are gone. It only took 30 lawsuits and 18 months. Yes, sir?
Isn't this the same gentleman that's awaiting a prison term?
No, not yet.
No, that's the former sheriff.
Same county. Okay, presence restrictions, some people call them proximity restrictions, so I hope you don't have them in your state. Okay, but it says you can't go certain places, and the worst ones say, or be within X number of feet of those places. Here in Texas? Well, I will be giving a full presentation tomorrow about residency restrictions, but what the hell. Here we go. The fact is that in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that city said sex offenders cannot go to the library. That's it. No sex offenders in our library. And they got sued by the ACLU. And they lost, the city lost the first round, and so they appealed it, and they lost the second round. Okay, and the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, the only next court above that is the U.S. Supreme Court. I really don't know if they tried to get the Supreme Court to review it or not, but the fact is that the city of Albuquerque paid ACLU over $1 million in attorney's fees. Ouch. And they had to open their libraries too. Okay, so whoever that attorney was, my hat is off to them for sure, and the whole ACLU. And then I was like, in California, we have similar ordinances, and I can't get the ACLU's attention. So we little pipsqueak, California RSOL, we've been in existence now for 4 whole years. Okay, what we did was, we just decided we're going to sue them. ACLU won't sue them, we will sue them. And I'm a self-proclaimed civil rights attorney, but guess what I did for 30 years before that? I was an aerospace attorney. Okay, I literally bought rockets and satellites for NASA and the Air Force. And so I didn't have a lot of experience doing this. And when we needed to file the first lawsuit, lo and behold, who would come and knock on the door is somebody who was on the registry and a former lawyer who used to work for a federal judge who knew how to draft a complaint. Okay, so God brings us gifts from above. And he couldn't sign the complaint, right? But I could. And I could file the complaint. And that, in fact, that complaint was our model that we used. And we sued, we really did file 30 lawsuits in 18 months. We had more cities and counties than that. The smart ones saw that we sued cities and counties, and they went, uh-oh, if we don't change our law, we might get sued. Oh, by the way, we sent them letters, too, telling them about this, and about our cases, and, that. So the smart ones, and there were about 50-something of those, they didn't get sued. But the dumb ones, the slow learners, they got sued. And everyone in Orange County was especially delicious. But I want to tell you, whether it's residency restrictions or presence restrictions or anything else that you are challenging, it takes a lot of preparation ahead of time. That has nothing to do with the court. So when it came to Orange County, we were there. We went to city council meetings, okay? They are boring. I traveled 4 hours in each direction so I could speak for 3 minutes, because that's the time limit, 3 minutes. You have to do it. You have to send letters. You have to do your best to educate them, because when you do sue the dummies, then the fact is you bring this information in front of the judge. Okay? We have sued one city that is particularly stupid because we're still in litigation with them. It's the city of Carson in Los Angeles, California, in the LA County. They are so stupid that we have sued them 3 times. Okay, so Frank Lindsay was a plaintiff. We sued the city of Carson. By the way, he has relatives who live in Carson. He's not supposed to stay there. I won't comment whether or not he does. But if he were to stay with them overnight, he would be breaking the law. And he's not supposed to go to the parks either, which his relative lives like a block from a park. So that would be a double whammy. But the fact is that Carson, again, is an outlier. They actually entered into a settlement agreement with us, and they said that they were going to change their laws. And so when we settled these cases, that's how we did it. They had to repeal or significantly revise their ordinance, or we wouldn't settle the case. And then they paid us a mere pittance. I mean, like $3,000, $5,000. The highest amount we ever got paid was $7,500. City of Pomona, they had a terrible ordinance, and they deserved it. Okay, to pay top dollar for repealing their ordinance. And you just have to do this. And so Carson entered into a settlement agreement. They were only going to pay us $3,000 in attorney's fees and costs. That's nothing. Trust me, it was worth a lot more than that to us. And then they reneged on their agreement. So we dismissed our case in federal court with prejudice, and they reneged on their agreement. I was like, okay, and they did it very publicly. It's not that this happened in the darkness of night. They did it at a city council meeting. We've got it on tape. We've got it on tape where city council members are saying, well, we don't care what the courts have ruled in this area. We don't agree with them, so we're not doing it. I cannot wait to get that information in front of a judge. I really can't. Because she is going to be so pissed. She's going to throw the book at him. And the fact is, we can't reinstate that federal case because it was dismissed with prejudice. So what we did is we're suing them in state court for fraud and for breach of contract. You know why fraud? Because afterwards they said, the city attorney and the city manager lacked authority to sign the agreement. Well, let's see about paragraph 27, which says that they have the authority to sign the agreement, to bind the city. They wrote the agreement, not me. They forgot what it says. So the fact is that we're in court with them. And by the way, because of the fraud allegation, if we can prove that's true, and by the way, I have the email from the city attorney to me saying that, and he didn't protect it in any way. That was not his smartest move. Anyway, because of that, we're going after punitive damages. So it's no more $3,000. They're going to wish they paid us $3,000. $300,000? $1 million? Then we won't have to do any more fundraising for a while. Maybe for a long while. Okay, anyway, I do want to get back to my charts here. Is there a Carl Hansen chart? Oh, here we go. One of the things we have to do to convince the U.S. Supreme Court and every court that the statements that were made in the U.S. Supreme Court are false is this. Dr. Carl Hansen, he's, by the way, from Canada, but he's considered the international expert on reoffense, okay? Dr. Carl Hansen basically says, without showing you his chart, if they haven't reoffended in 17 years, they're not going to reoffend. Now, that's the worst, most violent sex offense. He's got some other lines on his chart, but you know what? Going to state legislators, they can't get subtlety. So you just say, hey, if they haven't done it in 17 years, they're not going to do it. Come on, automatic off-ramp to get off the registry. We have a lifetime registry. You peed in public indecency, you're on the registry for the rest of your life, possibly. Okay, so use this. Dr. Carl Hansen, and his information is readily available on the website. This is his findings after decades of research. Not Janis Bellucci saying this, not California RSOL saying this. This is Dr. Carl Hansen. Next, please. And we've got some other superstars here. We had one of them here today, Emily Horowitz. We have some other folks out there. Jill Levinson, I hope you know who she is because she has been churning out this data for quite some time. Overall rate of reoffense is only 5%. Okay? Most sex crimes committed by individuals known to the victim. This is the kind of information we have to get before our judges and we have to get before our elected officials because otherwise they just remember what they heard in the media. And I actually had a man, when I told him, in California, our Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation puts out an annual report. And guess what the annual report says? 1.8% reoffense rate. 1.8%. And so I had somebody at church, my husband is a minister, and I'm at church, and somebody in the congregation who found out what I did, saying, oh my God, how can you do that, right? And I said, and he said, they always do it again. And I said, no, they don't. And I gave him that statistic. And he's like, well, I have never heard that before. The media says, right? And here's a line you can use. It worked. Has the media ever lied to you before? And he goes, oh yeah. I said, well, maybe they're lying to you this time. You need those snappy comebacks, don't you? Okay, so Jeffrey Sandler, he's done a good job too. Next slide, Emily Horowitz. I want to save some time for Q&A here. Next slide, we have a sex offender management board in California that rocks. I don't know why, but I'm very grateful. So they, in fact, support our positions, and they churn out these beautiful reports, which nobody reads except us, it appears. So one of the things that we do, by the way, and you might have to do this in your own state, is you need to get the information from your board, if it in fact supports our position, to the elected officials. And by the way, I am citing them in my lawsuits too, okay? It makes a difference. So we don't have to say those justices in 2003 were delusional or they drank too much the night before or whatever the hell their problem was. But the fact is, these are the facts today. And when I can quote the CDCR, which by the way supervises sex offenders on parole, they are not friends of people on the registry, and they say it's 1.8%, people believe them. Because again, it's not me saying it, it's not the organization saying it, it's these government officials saying it. And by the way, the U.S. Department of Justice says 5.3% over a lifetime. So the 1.8% is while on parole, which in California can be 20 years, unfortunately, up to 20 years. But the California DOJ says 5.3% overall. I've had a statistician argue with me that it's lower than that because he's dancing on a head of a pin. But I've got a Department of Justice study that says 5.3%, and that's what I'm going to show to our elected officials and any judge who, in fact, will listen. So this is the kind of information that's in our Sex Offender Management Board report. Okay? They mail them to the state capitol. These folks are not that far apart. They're all in Sacramento. And that's it. So we turn out to be the feet for our Sex Offender Management Board. We, at our own expense, are copying these reports and taking them to the elected officials because they support our position. Okay, so I talked about the presence restrictions in California and how they're gone, but guess what? The courts made them go away, or they're being afraid of the courts. But the fact is that early this year, we had 2 bills introduced to bring them back. Okay, presence restrictions to specifically authorize presence restrictions, cities and counties to adopt presence restrictions. Well, guess what we had? We had a Sex Offender Management Board report that said that's a bad idea. And by the way, this board was created by the state legislature, and it's supposed to be our state policy experts on this subject. They say it's a bad idea. So I testified to that fact. ACLU testified to that fact. Some place called Housing California I never heard about before, but I love them now because they testified to that fact, right? And guess what? In the first hearing that we had, they had the people up there testifying why this bill was necessary, blah, blah, blah. And then we got up and spoke. And they were in shock. They were really shocked. Oh my God. And it was funny because I didn't know ACLU was going to be there. So, I'm walking to the microphone. I practically got knocked over by this woman. It's like, who is this person, right? And it's like being in, a bargain store or something with elbows out, and I got to get that dress. And I'm glad I let her go by because she was the ACLU lobbyist, the new ACLU lobbyist. I hadn't met her yet. And she was brilliant. And she doesn't have sex offender in her title, right? So they listened to her. And the fact is that that day we had a hearing on the bill. They unanimously passed the bill, despite our stellar testimony. But one of the things that happened, and so I don't want to embarrass Pam too much, but Pam is here. And Robert, where's Robert? There's Robert. So these two right here, so we were passing out, these flyers the day before the vote and everything, and they practically mowed over the author of the bill. He just happened to be standing in the hallway, right? And can I paraphrase? They basically said, your bill stinks. And Robert said, and we're going to make sure that you aren't in the office very long. We're going to make sure you have a real short political career here in Sacramento. And at least he was curious, and then his staffer basically stood between these two and the assemblyman, right? And then we had the hearing the next day, and they voted unanimously in favor of it, and we're like, oh shit, another day. So what happened though was that so many people, and I think we had 9 that day, came up and spoke in opposition to the bill. He withdrew his bill. He withdrew his bill after he got a positive committee vote. And we're like, wow. And a few people who happened to call his office after that happened, who may or may not be related to this organization, said, hey, why'd you do that? And he said, I had no idea. I really had no idea that anybody would be opposed to it. Well, that was the Assembly bill, and that got erased. And then we had a Senate hearing, right? And it's like, oh, here we go again. And the first one, Assembly, it was a Republican, where our state legislature is heavily Democrat. So sometimes they listen to Republicans, but mostly not. So we thought, well, maybe we had a chance there, but we got, unanimously voted against us. But the next time it was in the Senate, and the fact is that the author of the bill was a Democrat and a woman. And I was like, uh-oh. Well, we have to do it. We just have to show up. We have to do the same thing. So ACLU testified, Housing California, I testified. We each get 3 minutes, by the way, right? And then the hordes come up because they open the microphone. Who's opposed to this bill? 15 people, a total of 15 people got up there and spoke. Okay? And when it was over, I'd say probably 3 of the 15 were registered citizens and identified themselves as such. And the chair of the committee said, I commend you. I commend you for being here today and having the courage to speak your position. She did. And then the chair said to the author, you know what? I don't like your bill. And if I were you, I'd withdraw my bill. And she did, right there and then at the end of the hearing. So that was another one. And next Tuesday, instead of being in Dallas, I'll be in Sacramento, as will some of the folks here. And we will be testifying once again because they're trying to overturn our state Supreme Court decision about residency restrictions. So the bottom line is I want you to know whether it's a courtroom or it's a state legislature or a city council, please go. Let your voice be heard. It does make a difference. We outnumbered them in that second hearing. We outnumbered them 5-1. They had 3 people who spoke in favor of that bill. We had 15 people who spoke against the bill. Okay? And those are optics. And the members sitting there, even if they're texting or whatever the heck they're doing and not paying attention to us, knitting, whatever they're doing, the fact is that they can't ignore 15 different voices saying this bill stinks or you're doing the wrong thing or whatever. And sometimes people travel hours. It takes me 5.5 hours each direction to get to Sacramento. There are no flights. I have to drive. So I go 5.5 hours each direction. I try not to do both directions on the same day so that I can talk for 3 minutes. And it's worth it. Because for so long, nobody has been there to push back, right? We're sitting here taking it. For decades, nobody pushed back. And so what it meant was elected officials kept passing new laws which are being applied retroactively, right? There's no pushback. There's no downside. Now in California, there's a downside. You pass another one of these fucking laws, I'm going to sue you. And I mean it, okay? And there are others out there who are willing to do similar things. I am willing to share my legal briefs with anybody, and I do mean anybody. I won't do it on our public website because I have to be careful about that, but if a lawyer calls me, I will give them all the legal briefs I've ever filed in my whole life and wish them well using them in your jurisdiction. I am only licensed to practice law in California, so if you are not from California, please don't call me and ask me to represent you. I cannot do that. So I'm involved in one case out of state, the state of Arizona, and I will never do anything there again. I don't know if this judge is manic depressive, schizophrenic, or bought. I don't know what it is, and this is the case that has to do with the websites and trying to keep your information off these privately owned websites. It is not going well, and I have bruises all over, almost 2.5 years now. And the man is a lunatic. I had no idea. I wish I would have picked a different family of websites, quite frankly, because this man, I've been told he's a sociopath. But it's okay. We have to do these things. We have to take the lumps. So many city council meetings, we went there. How about the city of Lancaster? Yeah, Kathleen's giggling. She drove how many hours for you to get to Lancaster?
I think over 3.
Okay, a long ways to get to Lancaster. I went a long way to go to Lancaster, and we get to their city council meeting, and they got a terrible ordinance. These are presence restrictions. You couldn't go to this place, you couldn't go to that place, you couldn't go to the museum, you couldn't go to the library. That one pisses me off. I just love libraries. How could you tell somebody they can't go to the library? And, and think about it, too, they can't go on the internet and they can't go to the library? What the F? So the fact is that in the city of Lancaster, in the private places, you can go to the bowling alley, you can go to the movie theater, you can go to the shopping malls. In California, we don't have many ordinances like that, thank goodness. But they're about to pass these ordinances. So we're there telling them, it's wrong, don't do it. You're violating the Constitution, right? That was the first time. The second time we came back, even more people were wearing buttons that say whatever they said. You're doing the wrong thing, violating the Constitution. I like to bring my my pocket Constitution with me to city council meetings, and I like to wag it at them. And this particular city council meeting, Robert, you were there too, and they're like, how dare you talk to us on 9/11? This wasn't the 9/11, but it was September 11th. And we're like, bozos, you're the one that scheduled the meeting. So we're here on 9/11 because you scheduled the meeting on 9/11. And Robert was so bold as to wear his veterans hat, U.S. Army veterans hat. He is a U.S. Army veteran, right? And Kathleen, one of the city council members, said to her, "I don't like that smirk on your face." I mean, that's how personal it gets. And at the end, this is what they said to us. I said to them, rather. So I made sure I was the last person to speak. You know, we lawyers, we like to get the last word in. And I said, look, if you are so foolish as to adopt this ordinance tonight, then you will be sued. I said, you'll be sued by me or another lawyer. You'll be sued by this organization or another organization. And the reply we got was, bring it on. Bring it on. So we did. They were the first city that we sued for presence restrictions. And they got to pay us more than $3,000. Yes, sir?
Why are you not sued for residency restrictions as well?
I'm sorry, repeat your question?
You're not sued for residency restrictions as well as presence restrictions.
Well, we picked the lowest hanging fruit, okay? We didn't have much credibility as an organization, and we needed to start somewhere. So we said, what's the lowest hanging fruit? What would be the easiest things to challenge? And it was presence restrictions. Yes, Lloyd?
Is that on your list, please?
Yes, our first residency restrictions case was filed last week.
I think I heard you hint about it a little bit, but isn't one of the other major components of overturning Smith versus Go the fact that the registry itself that they looked at the time was a completely different animal than what exists today, such as I don't even think they had everyday 90 registration. I don't even know if they had a website in that case. They certainly didn't have residency restrictions or proximity restrictions or driver's licenses with your name, on and on and on. And isn't that going to be a big key about, addressing all the components of the windows and tests and all these changes that occurred since?
Well, at the time of the case, according to my notes, the Alaska registration constituted a quarterly report by mail. So you didn't have to go anywhere in person. You just mailed something. I think Hawaii still does that, by the way. They didn't have a lifetime registry for anybody. But if you really want to get pissed, let me tell you about something that was said during oral arguments. This is the U.S. Supreme Court, okay? So they asked John Roberts, who was the attorney representing the state of Alaska, quiz, who is John Roberts today? Okay, very good. You'll all pass. He is the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court today, but he was representing the state of Alaska that day, okay? And he was asked this question. Isn't registering as a sex offender the same as applying for membership at Price Club? That was a question he was asked. And this was the answer he gave, paraphrasing. No, not exactly like that, but very similar. So, one of our board members compiled all the sex offender laws in the state of California. It's 3 volumes long. And he named his book The Price Club Application. So, the next time you go to Price Club or Costco or Sam's Club, whatever you have in your local area, please think of this case and how ridiculous that the Supreme Court justices were. And again, I hope it'll remind you why we need to overturn it. We're going to overturn it. Yes, sir?
Yeah, on the, just what kind of case would be that kind of case to walk that road with? Is one question. The second question, just on in regards to it being considered civil and not punitive. So what kind of civil penalty has a felony attached to it,
For failure to register? Yeah, exactly. So I'd be happy to take Frank Lindsay to the U.S. Supreme Court. That man, again, he committed one offense in 1979. It's a sex offense. He did it. He told me. You can read about it in his book even, okay? So he did do it. But that was 1979. He was an alcoholic at the time, all right? I have Frank Lindsay's rap sheet. He's not done a damn thing since then that deserves, he's not been charged with a crime. He's not been convicted of anything, misdemeanor or felony. He has been sober for 35 freaking years. He realized when he did what he did, he violated his own principles. Okay, that was him hitting the bottom as an alcoholic. I'm not an alcoholic, never been to an AA meeting, but I understand that people who are alcoholics many times hit that bottom, and unfortunately they're not all out there doing what Frank did. But the fact is, Frank has lived a law-abiding life ever since. I told you he was Volunteer of the Year, or Citizen of the Year rather, in Pismo Beach, California, because he worked his tail off to restore a historic building. So much of his sweat equity went into that project, and a lot of people now are reaping the benefit of that. You can go visit the Price Clubhouse in San Luis Obispo. So the fact is that, he's done wonderful things with his life. He wrote a book, for God's sakes. A plumber wrote a book, yeah, and you can even read it. And I say it's not a well-written book, but it does tell a compelling story, so I do recommend that you read it. It's called We're All in This Together, by the way.
Janet?
Yes.
Just one comment before any other questions. It's obvious, and we all see it, I think it's clear we've done a contrast here, where you can see that the court's rationale doesn't support that holding. And so now we have all these states that are moving, and we've looked at these states, incrementally chiseling away at this thing. They're persuasive. Okay, we're looking for something ideal so we can take it up, but the contrast is very clear now. The contrast is very clear now. And we're moving in that direction very, very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah. Gail.
Janice, what can we do to help you do that?
Help us connect with your attorneys. And so one of the great things about this conference is we've connected with other attorneys right here, and was like, oh, I've heard about you. Emily and I, we've heard about each other. We talked on the phone once, but we had never met in person. So that, you can always send money, but, I'm hoping, so this is Janice's fantasy, that the city of Carson will give us enough money to take this case to the Supreme Court. I believe that would be karma. Yeah. Yes.
You sort of touched on it, but are there not networks that your and other lawyers are part of? And we all hear that, defense attorneys have their groups that they hang out with, and they go to conventions and meetings, and there has to be an infrastructure already somewhat in place.
You ever heard of the ACLU? Okay, they're supposed to be protecting our civil rights, and they don't give a shit, at least in California. Okay, they did take up one case. It was their idea, not ours, so maybe that's why. But I cannot convince them. When I've got a library ban right here, I've got a 10th Circuit Court of Appeals case where the city of Albuquerque paid more than $1 million to ACLU, and the ACLU in Los Angeles won't take the case. So we did it ourselves, and we didn't charge them $1 million. California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, NACDL, all these organizations, they're afraid. They are afraid. Folks, sex offenders are lepers, okay? That's one way to understand it. Today's scapegoats, whatever term you want to use, people are afraid to represent you. Emily said it in her book, too. Okay? Why am I doing it? I don't know. I think I'm crazy some days. But on the other hand, after I turned 60, I didn't give a shit anymore what anybody thought of me. Okay? So they can call me whatever they want to. And the other thing is with lawyers, is some lawyers, I go, I have a perfect record. I have never lost a case. I look at an attorney like that and go, you're a fucking coward because you've only taken the safe cases. Nancy, by the way, is a very brave person in Maryland. She has done awesome work in Maryland. But I'll tell you that people look at these cases and they go, ha, I'm sure Chance could tell you some horror stories. We have people who have messy lives and they go, please, please help me. And we do our best, we do. But we know that no matter what. Remember that judge I mentioned? I'm in front of him. He is willing to say this in open court. All sex offenders are monsters. They always do it again and there's no cure. He really believes that. Because he thought he was safe in saying that in a public courtroom. By the way, I have a personal crusade with President Obama. I'm sure he doesn't know I exist. Whatever his screeners do with my mail, I don't know, but I'm sending him reports. I send reports to my own county district attorney. I don't know what she does with them either, but I never get a letter saying thanks for the information. Maybe she uses it for line or bird cage. But these are extremely unpopular cases. I think, Chance, you need to add in on there.
Well, I think about these things, and I think about lawyers who handle these cases. I listened to the panel yesterday. I was impressed. I thought we were, in small company. We're not. We're in big company. And the lawyers who pick these cases up are courageous. Their face is out there. They've got to face their colleagues. They've got to face their communities. They live in a place where people hear about that kind of exposure. And when they stand up, and they stand up for the right thing, it may not be the most popular thing to do, but it is the most courageous thing to do. It's just like all of you here today. We tell our folks in our meetings, show up, stand up, and speak up. And they go from this idea of being a victim to being a champ, because they are starting now to realize that the only way to really get things done in this world is to speak up, is to come out, is to quit hiding under a rock. I see this now in our profession. I see lawyers that are courageous and are willing to not only just do it, for their clients, but to take stands, to make statements in the media, and to be proud to be doing what they're doing. And my hat's off to them. I think they're just courageous, incredible people.
Thank you, Chance. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I went to California. I'm from there, and about 3 years ago, I was going to go back from my mom. She was having surgery. It was best for me to be there to help her recuperate. I was going to be there for 3 weeks. I was really scared, and I said, I'm going to just go. I knew about the 2,000 foot restriction. I called San Bernardino County, and I talked directly to the sheriff that runs the program. And he said, yeah, just go wherever you're going to be, go to the local sheriff's department, tell them. I said, well, what about the 2,000 foot? I didn't say it directly. He said, he's told me they told the state that aren't going to enforce it for people for all probation. And since then, I go back all the time, and I just go down to San Bernardino City, the sheriff's department of the county, and I say, I'm here. And it takes about 10 minutes. But it seems like in a lot of the areas, they just chose not to enforce Jessica's law for those, maybe not the cities, but the counties, just said we're not going to enforce it.
Well, what was going on was there was a series of cases. So that decision that was decided March 2nd of this year was in process for years. Right. Okay, and so it was contested. And so some counties said, we're not going there, but not all counties. And the fact is, you didn't know from county to county, and sometimes it depended who was the county sheriff and whether or not he or she wanted to, in fact, enforce residency restrictions. So the fact is, there is such uncertainty, right? Can I live here? Can I not live there? By the way, Jessica's law has no penalty, okay? There's no penalty in Jessica's law, but this is how they get you. When you go to register, they won't let you register there. You want to live with your parents? We're not going to let you register at that address. You want to register with your cousin? Oh, no, you can't register at that address because it's too close to a school, park, city ordinance. It could be the city swimming pool or whatever. That's how they enforced it, was through that. And if you don't register, guess what? Failure to register, you could end up with a felony conviction even if you had a misdemeanor sex offense. Yes, sir?
I had the great pleasure of registering as a transient and living out in my van and showing up every 30 days.
And then we had that status. We only really have two statuses, plural there, for registered citizens as far as registration. One is, in fact, it's an annual requirement. No, there's three. And then one of them is if you're considered a transient, which is like Jessica's law, you can't live in your family home or anywhere else, so you're considered a transient. Get this, as a transient, you can park your car in the driveway of your home. That's okay. But you're not supposed to go inside the house. Or, even better, you can park your car in the parking lot of a school, and that's okay. Even though the kids aren't there. Sir, you've already asked one question. Is there anybody else that has a question? If yes, Paul, in the back.
Assuming that you make it to the Supreme Court to revisit this issue,
Since Roberts tried the case for Alaska before, will he have to recuse himself from a subsequent consideration?
Yes.
I'm sure you've gone over this. I'm trying to get it straight exactly on what basis you were able to overturn the local ordinances. In Massachusetts right now, there's a case that is trying to overturn about 50 local ordinances on residency restrictions on the basis that the state alone has the right to pass residency restrictions and local cities and towns do not. Is that the basis, or was in other words, what was your legal argument to get them overturned?
It was our state constitution. And so there's a preemption clause, which basically says if the state has already governed in a certain area, the local governments can't do anything that's different. And so
if the state did pass a state residency restriction, they would be allowed, then there would be no argument there.
No. And by the way, the interesting, I mean, Jessica's law in California has such a tortured past in that there are two people named George and Sharon Runner. So Jessica's law, they tried to get Jessica's law passed in the state legislature, and I believe at that time Sharon was in the assembly and George was in the Senate. Okay, the power couple. And they couldn't do it. The state legislature said, no, we don't believe in that. We think it's banishment. We think it's unconstitutional. So what did they do? They found somebody who had a lot of money. And we have ballot propositions, most unfortunately. So Jessica's law was Proposition 83, and it passed by an overwhelming majority. And we were, we weren't even in existence at the time. I guess I can use that as an excuse or a reason. And it has not been... Okay, so it was contested here in the case in Ray Taylor. So the case that just got decided this year, 2015. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, got sent back down again to take evidentiary hearings. Okay, so it was in San Diego County, and San Diego County had to bring information in that showed that virtually all the housing that a registered citizen could afford was not available. Okay, so there's basically two parts of this. It was a densely populated area, number one, and number two, there's a lack of affordable housing. And they did have some, I'd say, pretty sympathetic clients. I remember one of them had AIDS and was addicted to cocaine, and he was, there was a treatment facility that would take him in, and he was a registered citizen, and they found out he was a 290, and they tossed him out. He spent the next 3-4 years living in a riverbed in San Diego, so and drying out on his own. So it takes that long sometimes for these cases to come about and to get a decision. So that said, residency restrictions are unconstitutional when they're applied to all parolees without exception. So what happened then is CDCR, which supervises parolees in California, said, okay, case-by-case basis. And so my understanding is anybody who's considered high risk still has residency restrictions. People who are not high risk don't have to comply with them anymore. But remember, we're only talking about 6,000 people. We have another 100,000 people that it's unclear. And so we had one county and 2 cities immediately repeal their residency restrictions. They're the smart ones. They get the gold stars. And then we have some other ones that are scratching their heads going, I don't know. And we have Carson, which is an idiot anyway, outlier, idiot. Same difference. And so they're probably not going to do it until a judge tells them they have to, and after they have to pay us a lot of money too. But the lawsuit that was filed last week, that is our first challenge of residency restrictions. I did not even mention the state constitution. I filed it in federal court. I want a decision based on the federal constitution that these are unconstitutional because I want every state to be able to use this decision. But keep your fingers crossed.
You might add in the lawsuit that the Supreme Court overturned that they also talked about the alley behind the parole office, where 8 or 10 people would sleep at nighttime because they had to come in the morning to plug in their GPS monitors.
Yeah, but it's not punishment, right? It's not punishment. And how about the roundups? In California, we have something for Halloween called Operation Boo. Don't you love that? Operation Boo. One year, this was in San Diego, they made everybody come in who was on parole or probation, sleep on cots under tents. And I got a call from one of them going, we're only 2 blocks away from a strip club, And I said, stay out of it, walk the other direction, don't even go near, because they got GPS monitors and they're not very accurate. I was like, oh, please. So, yeah. Yes, Paul?
Yeah, something real quick. I've seen some evidence, a couple different sources, that show that there's certain violent criminals have a higher chance of committing a follow-on sex crime than sex offenders. Have you seen any data like that? Almost like
No. If you have it, I'd like to read it.
You have to apply. They should register. I mean, obviously that's not advisable, but
Yeah.
I mean, anyway, I've seen data like that. I wish I could find it again.
Yeah, if you do, please share it with us. Yes, Gail.
There are a couple of things on the research end. There has been, and I know the research you're talking about, and I need to think about the name, where it actually showed, if you look at the rap sheet of a lot of these violent offenders,
Right.
some of them have sex offenses, and this is, part of, I think, the bigger discussion, actually. Many sex offenses are not driven by sexual deviance or sex.
Right.
They are driven by opportunity, substance abuse, control, crime of opportunity. You will have, and I said in our civil commitment hearing, and one of the things we looked at this guy's rap sheet, I figured, lock this guy up for sure. The rap sheet was very, very clear. He had been in and out of the system since he was a teenager, with everything from stealing cars to robbing a 7-Eleven. He raped a girl, in the course of another activity, got released, went back, and it was never about the sex. And even the latest one, he had an offense where he did a home invasion, and the woman was home, and the husband was there, and just for shits and giggles, well, I'm going to rape her, and you have to watch. And this was about power and control. It was not about sex. And he sat there through this whole civil commitment hearing with a jury of 8, 6 women, 2 men, with a smirk on his face, and while the experts on both sides did their thing, and all this information was out there. And when it came right down to it, because in Florida you actually have to have a hearing amongst your peers, they let him go.
Wow.
But it wasn't about sex or sexual deviance, so it's about violence and...
Yeah, so believe it or not, I actually worked with rape victims at one point in my career, and this is before I became a lawyer even, and that's what I found out. It's not about sex, it's about power. So rape happens because of power and not because of sex. It's not somebody's full of lust. They're mad as hell, and that's what they choose to do, how to express it. Yes, ma'am.
You're familiar, I'm sure, with Richard Gladden's case, Watergate? Which I understand is coming up in August.
No, but I think he's talking about it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hoping he's going to talk about it. I didn't realize the trial was supposed to be coming out. They said, they kicked it out, said you don't have standing. They went to, Chris, you can tell us more about this. They finished that, but they didn't have standing and they lost.
At the district court, they dismissed it right off the bat, saying that he didn't have standing and that his wife and kids didn't have standing either. They appealed it to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, where they, as expected, said he had standing, but as not expected, they said that his family and children were also impacted in a concrete way, and so they granted him standing as well.
That's great. It's a great case. And if he gets a positive decision, I'll be using it in my case too, suing the city of Grover Beach. It's the kind of stuff that we need to do, and we need to take risks because it's not happening otherwise. And like Chance said, every time we have one of our monthly meetings around the state of California, we're there saying, show up, stand up, and speak up. And then the qualifier is when you're ready. Because the fact is, Frank Lindsay's father did not know that his son was a sex offender when his book was published. And I'm the one that said, Frank, you might want to give your dad a call. Because if he finds out about this some other way, it's going to be really bad. Okay? So that's encouraging some people on the registry. Start out with your own family members. Okay? Whoever's the least scary. Because it's hard. It's hard to say, I messed up. Whatever it is, it's hard to say that, but And it doesn't happen in every situation, but in so many situations, family members understand. They understand that we're not perfect, that we make mistakes. And one of the other important messages that I personally deliver at each meeting, and I want to deliver at this presentation as well, is there's hope, okay? There is hope. Things are changing. It's kind of like putting your finger up in the wind. It's like the winds are changing, okay? My very first conference of National RSOL, we had name tags that had our first name on it, and that was it. And it was like, okay, I have a last name. Where's my last name? Well, nobody else has a last name either. People were afraid at a national RSOL conference to put their full name on their name tag, much less what state they came from. Look at your name tags today. Mine's got my first name, my last name, and my state, right? And a star, yes.
Talk about how scary that march was.
Okay. City of Carson, remember that outlier, the city that's not too bright? We decided that we were going to have a protest. And there's one city council member in particular, her first name is Lula. And Lula proclaimed war against us in her city council meeting. We proclaim war. We don't care how much it costs. I hope she remembers that when she writes the check. So we're like, okay, we think and by the way, the parks are off limits to registered citizens and a lot of other things too, fast food restaurants. So we decide that we want to have lunch with Lula in a city park. And we sent her an invitation, and we invited her fellow city council members to the lunch too, and we had it in a park in Carson, right? And so what we decided to do though is we gathered at City Hall, and we walked to a park. It was about a mile long. And we had our banners and our homemade signs and everything. And just so you know about Carson, it's a very diverse community. It's known for drive-by shootings and things. It was like, so this is going to be on a Saturday, and so I got a call on Thursday afternoon from a city official telling me that we hadn't requested a permit. And we're going to need a permit to do this. And oh, by the way, their office was closing in an hour and a half, right? Well, he shouldn't say shit like that to an attorney because I know we don't need a permit. So I said, well, thank you very much for your opinion, but we'll be there on Saturday. So then on Friday, I got a call from the sheriff's department. And the sheriff's department said something else, you really don't want to do this. It's a dangerous place, blah, 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 blah. Oh, by the way, we will be there in force. Cool. You're going to protect us. So, and we very specific. It's even on our website. 10 o'clock in the morning, City Hall, we're going to start this march, right? 10 o'clock Saturday morning, there's no cop around, no cop to be seen. We are, by the way, less than 1 block from the sheriff's department where we started. And there's no cop cars, there's no police officers. And it's like, well, I don't know where that sheriff is, but we're going to start anyway. So we started our march, and we're walking down the street with our things, and Frank and I, by the way, we don't usually stand next to each other. I'm serious, in public places, because we decided a long time ago that if they're going to try to kill us, they're going to have to use 2 bullets, one for him and one for me. So we're not going to let them just use one. So we're walking down the street, and Frank and I are at the very front holding this banner that says God only knows what. Carson stinks. And then we had 50 people show up. I mean, it was just awesome. We had 50 people show up. We had no idea who was going to show up, but 50 people showed up. We didn't ask anybody to RSVP because they say they're coming, they don't. They don't say they're coming, they do. Just show up. So we had 50 people. We're marching down the main street of this lovely town. We had to go buy a fast food restaurant, but just keep walking. Oh, by the way, they decided that they had to trim the trees on that main street that day. Like, really? Okay, we got to cross the street, the busy street, and then come back and stuff. And we had gone there ahead of time. We marked out, you couldn't be within 300 feet of the park. Not just you could not be at the park, you couldn't be without 300 feet. So we walked 1 mile. We never saw a police car in 1 mile. which is unusual in the city of Carson. So what we did find out, though, was people walking or driving by, they're honking their horns and giving us a peace sign or a thumbs up or something. Because guess what? The people who live there, they don't like the police either. I don't think they like their city council. But the fact is, we were really feared for our lives and did not know what was going to happen if we would make it to that park or not. And with 300 feet away from the park, we had crime scene tape waiting for us. We put it there. Okay, we had crime scene tape in there because we had a TV station this is a Los Angeles TV station, and we had the LA Times there covering our march. And so we were glad, it's got to think ahead. And so anyway, all the registered citizens stop at the crime scene tape, right? And they're just baking in the sun. And the rest of us walk into the park where there's a picnic waiting for us. Okay, and then we had a little red wagon, and we had this child of a registered citizen who pulled the little red wagon with her mommy full of lunch to our registered citizens who couldn't come join us in the park. And that made it on TV.
Now, this, I think, unless someone can correct me, this is the first time in the United States history on this issue that registrants marched. This is the first stand. Happened in California, happened in Carson, and it was a successful stand. And you know what? No one said anything derogatory. We got lots of support going down that street.
We need to do it in Washington.
We, even though we saw no police officers the whole trail, when we got there, there were 6 squad cars waiting for us. And I was like, are they waiting? And actually somebody in this room, Robert Curtis, hold up your hand, walked in. He's a registered citizen. He did walk into the park, and nobody wanted to arrest him. I was like, okay. And then I think you joined your colleagues a little bit later. And then when the police sheriff, thank you, deputy sheriff said, it's awfully hot, and where these folks are standing, they were, or sitting on the curb. I mean, it's just a sidewalk, right? And he says, it would be okay if they went to this other place where there's some shade and some grass, which was right across the street from the park. It was less than 300 feet. And I'm like, can we trust this man? But anyway, they did, and it was a lot nicer there. Lula did not. We were so disappointed.
Yeah, we showed up. Lula didn't. Yeah.
But we are going to return to Carson and the city council meeting on July 21st. We're going to protest before the council meeting and then during the council meeting. And that should be fun. I'm not worried about anybody shooting us, I don't think, inside the city council meeting. But I don't know what Lula might throw at us or something. Yeah, and actually another fun little thing that happened was there's a bail bonds woman that's her office is right before the city hall, and I went to her the night before and I said, we just might get arrested, and do you think you could represent us? And it turned out she's a former mayor of the city of Carson, and she thinks their current city council is a bunch of fools too. So she said yes. Yes, ma'am.
When y'all going in protest, I'm sure that you could bring her forward with what you said on she doesn't care what the price is. Remember, you're going to be signing a check.
I like it. Yes, sir.
We've had rallies at the Capitol here in Austin. Mm-hmm. And they make the news, and I don't quite know what the count is, but a couple hundred people show up. So,
that's fantastic. It's fantastic. And you just have to keep doing these things, and more people show up as they get comfortable.
And it's hotter here than Carson.
That's very true. Yes, sir.
Yeah, here's a good quote from your city council meeting. It's Albert
Robles.
Mm-hmm. The pedophiles are a special danger to society, especially outside of prison.
And you want to hear something really scary? He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer. Okay, so some people might, in closing, yeah, and he's recently been accused of sex offenses himself. Okay, so there you go. So in closing, what I'd like to say, it is possible to get shit done. You got to show up, stand up, and speak up. And you need to ask. So I will tell you that for our presence restrictions lawsuit, I just, I did some real quick figures on the paper about how much these lawsuits would cost, and I figured for $3,000 a piece, and if we filed 7 lawsuits, the cities would all figure out what to do. And so I went to actually our wealthiest member. His son is still in prison, by the way, for possession of child pornography in federal prison, and I said, so-and-so, this is what we'd like to do. It's going to cost $21,000. Thinking that he and his family might make a contribution, if we're really lucky, half of that amount, right? And so we walked out, and he hadn't mentioned anything. He was like, yeah, we're going to think about that. And so I was walking to the parking lot, and the person who went with me is like, well, do you think they're going to buy it? I don't know. If so, how much? I don't know. And he comes running out. It was great, because he and his wife, it had to be a joint decision. He comes running out like a little schoolboy, and he goes, 25. 25. And that has been the sourdough starter for our lawsuits. So we file as many lawsuits as we can. We wait. We settle the cases. We use that money to sue the next batch of cities. It's a recipe that works. I hope you use it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to, before the break, Larry has a couple of announcements to make.
Thank you, Mary Sue. Somebody's got to be a bad guy, and I guess it'll be me for now. We've got an announcement to make on the hotel shuttle for tomorrow morning. There has been a change. Your program says 8:15 and 8:35.